you. Thank you for coming out on this rainy night. I'm so happy to be here with you and tell you about my book, The Bitch in Your Head. I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes, and then I'm going to throw it open for questions. And I love questions, so please feel free to ask anything you want. And the reason I always encourage questions when I give a talk is A, for me, because it's fun to hear what you are thinking about and what you're interested in. But the second reason is for you, because research shows that people do not get what they want out of their personal lives or in the workplace because they don't ask. So you can practice asking tonight. But I'm going to start with a question that people often ask me, and that is, how long did it take you to write the book? And that's a complicated answer because I've been thinking, I thought, and I researched the issues of self-esteem and self-criticism for about 8 or 9 years. But it only took me a year to write the book. So I'm a quick writer, but not a quick study. But here's what I found. Most women and many men live with a litany of self-criticism. They say awful things to themselves on a regular basis. You know, they're going out the door and they say, "You look fat." They say things like, "You blew it. How could you be so stupid? Nobody wants to hear what you have to say. Don't even try, it'll never work." Some people hear what I call the bitch in your head. That's what I call the bitch in your head. Some people hear it and they think it's motivating them. They think it makes them work harder or smarter. And other people think it protects them from being arrogant or maybe protects them from being disappointed. But most people are just so used to this barrage of self-criticism that they don't even hear it as it wears down their self-esteem and it makes them depressed and limits their potential. Every psychologist works with self-critical patients and students, people who think it's impossible to find the love or self-acceptance or success that every human deserves. But the problem is that traditional psychotherapy techniques simply aren't effective at dealing with self-criticism. At least that's what I found. And one day, when it seemed like every patient I'd seen all week was drowning in self-criticism, I started a session with a lawyer who was often criticizing herself. But this day, she started on a whole new tact. Now, she was one of the few patients I've ever worked with who was a lawyer who actually liked being a lawyer. But that day, she started saying, "I am so stupid. I should have gotten an MBA. I would be making so much more money. How could I have been such a fool to get a law degree?" So I was thinking, how am I going to break through and show her how mean she is to herself? Because I'm a psychologist who doesn't just like to sit and listen. I like to actually do something and solve the problem that the people bring to me. So I'm sitting there desperately trying to figure out how to break into this, and kind of out of my mouth popped, "Boy, are you a bitch." Well, she, woo, that's the way she felt too. She, pulled back, and it was like I'd struck her. And I waited a beat, and I said, "To yourself." And thank goodness she got it. Otherwise, she could have brought me up for malpractice or something. Anyway, she could finally hear this because by labeling and personifying that voice in her head, she could finally hear how self-destructive it was. Well, the next person I saw was a woman whose husband had left her. And she was feeling very insecure and much too insecure to start dating again until she saved up for breast implants. And that day she came into my office and she said she turned down a date with a cute guy at her gym that she liked. So I figured, well, the bitch line worked so well the session before, maybe I'm going to try it again. So I said, boy, are you a bitch? And then I followed it with, would you ever tell your daughter that she shouldn't start dating until she was a D cup? And again, she could hear it. She could hear what she was doing to herself. Now, the good news is I did not become a one-trick pony calling everybody a bitch. But I did notice that over the next year or so, almost everybody I worked with, male and female, in one way or another, were saying things to themselves that they would never say to a friend or they never say to their child. But somehow they were saying these mean things that they knew would be depressing to other people, and they thought it was okay to say these things to themselves. But when I started thinking about writing a book on this subject, and the bitch in my head said, it's no big deal. You'd be wasting your time if you tried to do that. But despite that, I began asking my colleagues how they saw self-criticism in their practices. A friend of mine, a colleague who specializes in body image and weight control, said that, interestingly enough, people who dislike their bodies and are very unhappy with the way they look, are very unself-accepting, have a much harder time losing weight than people who are self-accepting. And when you think about it, if you look in the mirror and you say, oh, those hips are disgusting, that's really depressing, and it makes you want to crave comfort food. Another colleague who works with heart patients said that people who blame themselves for their illness are often very self-destructive. They're mad at themselves, so either consciously or unconsciously, they don't take their medication or they continue smoking. Negative thoughts impair marriage counseling. One of the most important things is to come up with some negotiation for your problems and your issues, but the bitch in your head often tells women it would be, that would just be weak. If you negotiate something, you're going to let him get away with bad behavior. And we all know that shopaholics will never fill the hole in their self-esteem with all the junk they buy. Child psychologists know, as well as every parent knows, that children deal with a myriad of self-defeating and self-critical thoughts. And I've seen how negative thinking affects careers. Because since graduate school, I was trained in both psychotherapy and career counseling. And since graduate school, I've asked this question to every career counseling patient. I say, if I had a magic wand and I could make anything possible, and you didn't have to worry about whether you were smart enough or properly trained, or whether you could make money, or whether your parents or your partner would think you were crazy, if I just had this magic wand, what would you do and how would you live? And when I started asking that question, I thought I was going to hear how 50-year-old women wanted to be prima ballerinas. And I thought I'd hear how junior accountants, wanted to live like billionaires and loll around on yachts in the Mediterranean. But the kind of sad thing I found is in all these years, I've only had a handful of people who told me things that were impossible. Once we start looking at their vocational interest tests, once we start making plans about how they could possibly actually pull off what they want to achieve, most of them have found that what they thought were impossible dreams were actually possible. Now it's probably time to tell you that bitch is a word I never use in my personal life. It's sexist and it's ugly, and in fact, it took me a long time to be able to say the title of my book in public without getting upset and uncomfortable. But when I started being able to try out the title of my book on people outside of my office, many men gave me a blank stare. They just didn't get it. but every woman I talked to got it. Even the most successful, beautiful, and apparently secure women nodded their head and they understood what I was talking about. I was chatting with the mayor of a small town, and she asked me what I was doing, and I decided to try out the title on her. So I said, I'm working on a book called The Bitch in Your Head. And her eyes widened, and I thought, oh no, I've offended her. And until she said, it begins the moment I wake up. I can't even get out of bed without thinking about all the mistakes I made the day before. And I met a consultant, a very successful consultant at a conference. And I tried out the title of my book on her. And she said, every time I get a new assignment, I think, can you really do this? Who do you think you are? And a friend of mine told me, she's an executive, and she emailed me the day after, and she said, I realize I can spend hours and days dwelling on things, even if they didn't matter all that much. So the bitch clearly struck a note with women. And even better was the next time I spoke to them, they often said that by labeling that voice in their head, they could hear it and it lost its power. So if you are a woman listening to this, even if you are a smart, well-educated, successful executive, you may be nodding your head in agreement. But if you were a man in the audience, you might not be getting it. And it's not that men aren't self-critical and that they don't have self-doubts. It's really, I think, a matter of degree. As a matter of fact, I would guess that the amount of time, mental time, that women spend on self-criticism and self-doubt is probably equal to the amount of time that men spend thinking about sex. Goodness is right. That's a lot of time. When I was in graduate school, I read studies that showed that women blame themselves for mistakes, but men tend to blame the situation or someone else. And recent bestsellers about women in business indicate that this problem has not gone away. Other studies show very interesting gender differences. For example, when men and women look in mirrors, they look at exactly the opposite thing. Let's imagine a beautiful woman looking in a mirror. What do you think she sees? She's going to zone in on what she does not like. She's going to say, oh, I'm getting crow's feet. Oh, my hips are too big. Things that other people might not even notice, but that's what she's going to see. Now let's imagine a man with a giant beer belly and bow legs, and he's looking in the mirror. And what do you think he says? Ooh, my eyes still sparkle. Oh, I can still flex an arm muscle. And he's going to walk away feeling great. And speaking of gender differences, how many men do you know who feel like a terrible parent and they're so guilty when they spend Saturday on the golf course away from the kids? But whether you're a man or a woman, it's possible for the bitch to affect every area and every era of your life. It can start in childhood and last through old age. Almost everyone goes through what psychologists call the catastrophes of childhood that leave scars and phobias. And if you had a learning disability, it can leave you feeling permanently stupid. I know this because when I was a little girl, I got very good grades, but I had a secret. I didn't know my left from my right, and I still don't. And every time somebody said, aren't you smart? My little bitch would say, yeah, but how smart can you be if you don't know your left from your right? So it wasn't until I got to graduate school that I realized I could be smart and have a learning disability. But even the smartest kids without learning disability these days can suffer. Caltech, as you know, it's one of the best schools in the country. It reports that their brightest female students often feel they're fakes, that they have somehow fooled everybody into thinking they're bright, and they really don't deserve to be at Caltech. The bitch can affect every area of life, from our feelings about dating and marriage and parenting through to our social and work lives. Our inner bitches can keep us from getting the love we want or the raise we deserve. They can keep us from being in good health. A number of physicians have told me they're very frustrated because so many of their patients, probably the majority of their patients, either catastrophize something or ignore it. You know, the bitch will say, oh, it's nothing, forget it, or oh my God, you're gonna die. And I would bet that the majority of you, when you wake up in the middle of the night, the bitch torments you there, saying, oh, you're never gonna get to sleep, you're gonna be exhausted tomorrow, it's gonna be terrible. So you may remember that Sigmund Freud famously said, what do women want? And I think they want to get rid of the bitch in their head. Whether we are talking about dating or marriage or parenting or socializing or working or health issues or athletics, whatever we're talking about, I think they want to stop being so self-critical. They want to stop blaming themselves for their mistakes and start taking credit for their successes. No more, oh, I don't deserve this, I was just lucky. They want to feel good when they buy something pretty. No more, when I get home and I try it on, somehow it just never looks right. They want to stop being afraid to ask for a raise. No more accepting that the guy next to you earns more. They want to stop feeling bad when their children aren't always happy. No more, I feel like a terrible mother. The children next door always seem happier than mine. The children next door seemed happier than yours. They want to sleep through the night. No more waking up at 2 or 3 in the morning and tossing and turning and worrying about stupid stuff and not being able to get back to sleep. They want to be able to invite people over for dinner or go to a party alone. No more being afraid to go to an event and being afraid that you won't know anybody and nobody will want to talk to you. They want to stop feeling that they should be at work when they're home and home when they're at work. And they want to stop feeling that, wondering why their husband can work all week and then go out and play golf or tennis, and they feel guilty about having lunch with a girlfriend. They want to stop getting nervous about blowing it when they want to serve a ball or hit a ball with a golf club or play cards. Whenever I think I'm going to shank the ball, I usually do. So what do women want? They want to get rid of the bitch in their head. And the interesting thing I found when I'm speaking to a mixed audience with men want the women they love to get rid of the bitch in their head too. They don't like the fact that their women are being very self-critical, and they want them to be more self-assured. So I'm happy to talk about any of these subjects and answer any questions. But I'm going to leave you with 3 things, and then I'm going to ask you a question, and then I'll throw it open. So the 3 things are, I think the most important thing for getting control of the bitch in your head are, 1, never say anything to yourself that you wouldn't say to a dear friend or your child. Why should you treat yourself worse than your friend? 2, go on a bitch hunt with a friend, because your friend will be able to hear your self-criticism probably better than you can, and you can hear it in your friend. And it's really important that we call each other on this and be supportive that way. And the third thing is positive visualization. If you are going to serve a ball, if you're going to give a speech, if you're going to go on a job interview, most of us get very nervous and we imagine ourselves blowing it. I know that's one of the reasons why I got over my public speaking phobia, and I actually enjoy speaking these days. I used to imagine myself just absolutely making a fool of myself. And now I imagine myself having fun. And it's very helpful. But I'm going to leave you with a question. No matter what your age or your life circumstance, I bet each of you have a personal goal that you would like for yourself, or to do for your community, or to do for the world. So, if I had a magic wand and I could make anything possible, and you didn't have to worry about whether you thought people would think you were crazy, and you wouldn't have to worry about whether it would make money or cost money, and you didn't have to worry about whether you were smart enough or skilled enough or trained enough. If I had a magic wand and could make anything possible, what would you do and how would you live? So think about that for a minute, and then I hope you'll switch and think about some questions, because I'd love to hear what you'd like to ask. Questions, please. Yes.
Well, as many of you know, I've just moved, and so I've got still in my basement boxes and boxes and things, mostly stuff that came from my parents. So, and it gives me, I read the book by the Japanese woman about tidying, so this stuff gives me no joy, but something is holding me back from getting rid of the things that my mother loved and collected and accumulated. And so help me get rid of it, right? Bring it to the bazaar.
That's a wonderful question, and that's a very common thing, that, you know, when you've inherited beautiful things that your mother loved but you don't want and you don't like, how can you tell yourself to get rid of them? And the simple answer is, when someone gives you something, it belongs to you, and you are allowed to do anything you want with it. It is not theirs anymore, it is yours. Well, no matter what the bitch says. The bitch says, your mother loves this, she'll be very upset if you give it away. But
she's dead.
She's dead. You're right. She's not going to zap you from heaven if you give away the chair, Aunt Tessie's chair. So the point is, it really is yours. And you can pass it on to someone else who loves it, either through giving it away or selling it or giving it to the bazaar. Someone else will love it the way your mother did.
Give it to your children.
Maybe they don't want it either. That was a great question. How about some other questions? Yes?
Have you found a correlation between degree of self-criticism and birth order?
And birth order. That's very interesting. I have not, because quite honestly, I'm not as into the birth order thing as most people, because people who are firstborn, for example, can feel very pressured to perform and to take care of their younger siblings, or they can be considered the little king or the princess and, you know, rule the world. So I don't find that there's necessarily a correlation. Just the same with middle children can be perfectly secure, and the baby can either try to strive to keep up with the older ones, you know, and be driven, or can be considered the baby and free from, you know, any stress. So No. But it can, that's the interesting thing about psychology, is often it can be absolutely true, or it can be the opposite. So, yeah. Yes?
How do you deal with people who are insomniacs? Your patients, and some people wake up and they watch the clock go by. Yes, you are going to be exhausted tomorrow. Even if you're not self-critical, but just tell me more about how you talk patients through that.
Sure.
Who are having trouble.
The question is, how do I deal with patients who are insomniacs? Here is the basic truth that everyone who wakes up in the middle of the night should know. This is what the pharmaceutical industry does not want you to know. And that is that if you just lie there resting and relaxing, it is almost as good for you as going to sleep. It's the tossing and turning and worrying that leaves you feeling bad. So I tried this on myself, and I thought I wasn't gonna, it wasn't gonna work. But when I have other methods in the book. I have a whole chapter on the bitch at night, but this is the one that worked for me. When I wake up in the middle of the night, 2 or 3 o'clock, I look at instead of saying, oh my God, I've got to get up in 4 hours and I'm going to be exhausted and I'll fall asleep in front of a patient and this is going to be terrible, I say to myself, I've got 4 hours just to lie here and relax. And I thought, you're never going to believe this one. But in fact, I do. Because I do know the truth, that if I just lie there and relax, and I have some, for me, it also helps for most people to have a soothing mental image. For me, I'm out on a sailboat, and in truth, I sunburn terribly, but I have a magic screen on my image of the sailboat, so I can lie out in the sun, and I can feel the boat resting and rocking, and I feel the sun, and it feels so wonderful, and I either lie around and enjoy that, but usually I'm so relaxed that I fall back to sleep. So it's that putting yourself in a no-lose situation. When you catch yourself fretting, I also tell people to have a pad and pencil by the side of their bed, because if you get a good idea or if you have to worry about something, you write it down and you say, I'm going to worry about this tomorrow, because you all know, logically, you cannot solve problems very well in the middle of the night. They just seem catastrophic. And you're too tired to think of good solutions usually. So, you write it down, you say, I'll think about this tomorrow, and then you get a nice positive image, or you just meditate or relax for a few hours. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
I was going to say, isn't the self-criticism a positive thing, though, to help you get out of lethargy or help you change?
Good question. And a lot of people think that way. Isn't self-criticism helpful? Well, there's constructive criticism and there's destructive criticism. Destructive criticism is the bitch in your head. It's negative, it's insulting. It doesn't leave you feeling like you can change. Constructive criticism acknowledges a problem, and it comes up with solutions to the problem. So it's we should always be very careful. I hope that we would do this with our children. You wouldn't say, you're so stupid. You'd say, well, this is the way you study, or if you're really having trouble with math, let's get you, a tutor. You'd outline the problem, and then you'd start constructively planning how to solve it. So, yes, Dorothy.
Do you find that people are more self-forgiving in old age?
Are people more self-forgiving in old age? Again, some are, some aren't.
I just wondered if it was a factor of how you lived a long life and what was wise, and just accepting what you have done and not done.
Some people are able to let go and relax and enjoy it. I find for most people, old age is the most difficult stage of life because it's very easy to get depressed. There's so many losses, so it's very easy to think about the negative and the depressing things. A lot of women are upset because they feel their attractiveness is no longer the case. A lot of men are upset because they feel that they were successful and now they're has-beens, or their physical strength that they counted a lot on, they can't count on that. There's research all over the at least the Western world that says when we start doing things like, our eyesight starts going, or our strength starts going, that can trigger a major depression. So, and I think in retirement communities, there's a lot of depression, a lot of alcoholism, because people are just bored. I have a chapter on old age, and I love, since I was in my 20s, I've collected role models for how to age well. People who stay vital and still are making a contribution to the world and to the communities, and I'm pretty excited about people like that. So, yeah.
Have you looked into research? Does this have to do with being a woman, or is it part of being a woman like we are, advantaged like we are, or women who are disadvantaged? Do they have the same kind of problem?
The question is, do women who are advantaged have a bigger bitch, or do women who are disadvantaged? I have spoken to groups, international groups. I've spoken to women in poverty and women who are very, very wealthy, and it doesn't seem to matter. And one of the most interesting things to me, I've been trying to piece together why men, as I say, men are self-critical, but it seems to me that it's mostly about his is bigger than mine issues. Body parts, income, prestige. It's pretty often focused on that. Whereas women, boy, it's all over the place. There isn't one area that we can't pick ourselves apart about. And I was wondering, why is that? And there's some really interesting research that came out about 10 years ago. Bear with me for a minute, because there's a trail here. The psychologists used to think that everybody had a fight or flight response to danger. Under stress, in danger, we would fight it or we'd run away from it. Then they found that that's just men. So men from the Stone Age had to be a little detached from people and their families, because if the saber-toothed tiger came, they had to leave their families and go out and die to protect them, or they ran away. But the research shows that women do not have that response. We do not have the fight or flight. We have what's called tend and befriend. Our first response to danger is to make sure the kids are okay and to gather our friends, because we feel there's safety in numbers. So when the saber-toothed tiger was roaming around, we would gather our friends and stay in the cave. And I think that because we see safety in numbers and safety in friendship, we are much more worried about disturbing those friendships. We're much more self-critical. We don't want to do anything bad, and people might not like us. Anyway, that's my personal theory about some of the gender differences. And of course, there's, I mean, how many men read 50 ways to be a better friend or 50 ways to be a better parent, I mean, how many times are you in the supermarket line and you see the flabby men on the beach? I mean, you just don't see that. It's the pressure that we have from the media. There's the whole, what I call the beauty industrial complex. I mean, billions of dollars would be lost if we started feeling good about ourselves just the way we are, The economy would collapse. So, anyway. Another question, yes.
So if women are more likely to have this tendency, it occurs to me, what word would one use if a man had that voice in his head? I mean, I'm just trying to think, in the English language, what is the male version of bitch?
That is a great question, and I have thought about that with male patients, and I've asked them to come up with it. And again, this is a very sexist part of our language. There's no such thing, I mean, there are a lot of rude words that I could use, but none convey the mean, critical, nasty voice. So,
and you're going to be ostracized because of it.
Yes, and you're going to be ostracized because of it. There's no, I haven't been able, if you come up with it, please let me know.
Bastard, Scrooge.
Well, Scrooge just has to do with being cheap. And yeah, that's just being cheap. Bastard, I mean, that's mean, but it's not that. A dick? That's close, but I don't think it has that. I think if you say to a guy, "Oh, you're being a dick," they can dismiss that. But if you say to a woman, "You're really a bitch," it's going to hurt. It's going to sting.
Say, isn't that too bad?
Yeah. Anyway. Any other questions? Yes.
This is a weird question, but
I like weird questions.
if you have a bead in your head, okay, it's been with you for a long time.
Yes.
It's going to be hard to eradicate.
Yes.
If you have daughters,
Yes.
how do you help them not have beads?
No, that's a fabulous question. How do you help your daughter not have a bitch in her head? And
I do sometimes hear myself being self-deprecating, and then my kids copy it, and they say horrible things about themselves. And I
Right.
say, that's so awful. Why are you saying that? Well, Mom, you always say that about yourself, and it shames me. But how do you?
No,
by
that's-
role modeling or?
That's a wonderful question, and as you say, one of the most important things, our children want to look up to us, and they don't want us to be self-critical. They want us to apologize when we're wrong, but that's very different from putting ourselves down. So you're absolutely right. The first thing to protect your children, male or female, from being overly self-critical is to not do it to ourselves, to catch ourselves and not do it anymore. The second thing is this whole good job crap. It just makes me crazed when I hear parents saying good job for doing nothing. I think you save praise. It's very important to praise, but you save praise for when they really achieve something. I'm really proud you worked hard and you got this good grade. I'm really, I think that's wonderful that you got an A, or, that, you really worked hard on the field and, you got a goal. I mean, they might not have won, but, you give specific praise for specific things that they worked hard on or they achieved. I think it's wonderful to tell your child, you look beautiful tonight, or I think you're a beautiful girl, but not, you're the most beautiful girl in the world, I mean, of course we think they're the most beautiful girl in the world, but you know, it's much more specific praise. So.
I think that's what's complicated, is that people also don't want to be braggy, right? And you want to teach humility. So part of being self-deprecating is, I mean, it'd be worse if I was like, I'm fabulous, I'm so great and smart and wonderful. Okay, that's nauseating. You don't want to do that.
True.
So it's kind of
True.
It's a tricky thing, the bitch versus somebody who's humble and wants to self-improve. Because that's what we try to always see. How can we fix it? How can we make it better? Like, that's complicated to put. Is that a bitch? You know what I mean?
Right. I don't think we have to worry about making our children think they're the most wonderful things in the world.
No, but I mean, even us. Like, you know what I'm saying? Even as a person, you don't want to always feel like it's so human to have humility and to think about what to improve. So, like, the fine line between that and the bitch.
Well, yes. How do you have that fine line between praising yourself and being proud of yourself,
Right.
which is wonderful. We should all be proud of ourselves, and you know, being arrogant. That's a great question, and I think arrogance says I'm the best, but self-confidence says I really did a good job. Okay. And I think that's different. We should be proud of ourselves for doing a good job. We should be proud of ourselves for looking nice. You know, what's wrong with that? But I think the rule of thumb in psychology is anybody who's worried about being a narcissist isn't one. It's the people who don't worry about it that have the problem. So I don't think you have to worry about that one. And you know, if you catch your child saying, you know, I know everything, I'm so smart. I doubt that. I mean, very few children think that, and if they think that, they're probably little kids. And you know, I mean, I remember my son said once, I know everything. I know a house is a house. I know a tree is a tree. And my husband said, well, what's Einstein's theory of relativity? You know, and I look back on that and I'm really sorry that, you know, we didn't say, yes, you know everything, because he was at a stage where he knew the word for everything. And that's what he was trying. He was so proud of himself. I mean, we didn't squash his ego with the Einstein's theory of relativity, but still, you know, I think only little kids would be so proud of themselves. We don't have to worry about it. Anyway, any others?
Yeah. I think there's a difference between going around and saying, yes, I did a great job, but saying it internally. You don't walk around unless you're with people who say, look, I'm about to say something only an 8-year-old can say, yes, I did a great job. Otherwise, people can say, yeah, you make me sick. So just say it yourself. And then. That's
a good point, to say it to yourself. There's a story about Margaret Thatcher, who, when she was complimented for being so successful, you know, most women, I think, would say, oh, you know, I was just lucky. But she said, I worked really hard for this. And I thought that was a great response, you know? She worked really hard, and why shouldn't she say that? So I don't think that would be arrogant, you know, but yeah.
You were saying that men that didn't take medicine, it was, research showed that it was self-defeating or something of that nature. I've always thought that men wouldn't take medicine because they were too macho or, you know, some kind of feeling like that. Well,
that could be, you know, why don't men take medicine? That could be true, or some of them don't like the side effects. But I was just saying that a colleague of mine who deals with heart patients, she said that she had found that and it was mostly men who, you know, they were mad at themselves. They thought they caused it by bad eating or by smoking. If they were mad at themselves, they often took it out on themselves by continuing to smoke or by not taking their meds. So it was that self-criticism that undermined them getting to be healthy again. Anybody else?
this isn't exactly on it, but I'm a teacher, and there are various ways of teaching you. Some children are visual, some children are auditory, and then there are all the other ways of learning things. It is difficult. I can only give you my own example. I was lucky, whatever. I fell into a job at which I am very good. I like children. I enjoy being with children, and I work with children. I'm very good. I teach autistic kids. Not halfway into my career, but I was pretty much set. I knew who I was and what I could do, and I knew I was good at it. And then my husband decided to open a deli, and I was the waitress.
Ooh.
Now, I am not an auditory person. I'm really visual. So it was my job to take down pastrami en rye. By the time I wrote pastrami, I couldn't remember if it was going to be on rye bread or white bread. If my first job out of high school or college had been as a waitress, I would have considered myself so stupid because I could not even do a waitress's job. But I knew how good I was at what I did do, so it didn't bother me that much. But I found it was quite a disconnect, that this was something I could not do. But there was no bitch in my head that said, you were stupid, because I knew it wasn't.
Good. But I think you're right. I think you're right. You know, if you start out doing something that you don't like, that does take away from your self-esteem. I have a friend who is a pianist and actually won a MacArthur. But his first job was working in a cheese store, and he got fired because he kept cutting himself and bleeding on the cheese. And he said it really took him a while to recover from getting fired. And you know, I see a lot of young men, mostly men have this. Young men have this problem. They get out of college, and they are living at home for a year or two, and they just don't seem to get out and get into the job market. And what I find with them is they're terrified that they're going to get stuck in something. They're going to take a first job, they're going to hate it, and they're going to get stuck in it for the rest of their life. That's the bitch in their head. But as opposed to realizing that, you know, if you take a job and you don't like it, you've found out a lot about what you can do and what you can't do and what you like, and, you know, it helps you, you know, tack and get on a different path. So, yeah. And I know you're a wonderful teacher, so even if you can't remember pastrami goes on rye, what's a poor WASP girl like you to do, right? Anyway, thank you for coming out, and it's fun, and let's get some wine. So, thank you.